Hi everyone, Michael Leiden here with an introduction to my 5-day trauma repair intensive class. And if you want more information about this or you want to sign up, you can go to realizationconsulting.com or you can click on one of the links below if you're watching this on YouTube. So long story short about me, I've spent the better part of 15 years training and training others in various transformative healing arts modalities. But the one that I landed on that I've felt has been what I resonate with the most and what's created some of the most powerful healing experiences for me, and what has also fostered some of the most powerful healing experiences I've seen in others is something called the realization process. And this is a body-focused pathway for spiritual awakening and psychological healing. It was created by Judith Blackstone, who's an retired experiential psychotherapist, basically, who used this series of techniques that she basically came up with. It's a mix, you could say, of body work, non-dual meditation, embodiment practices, and attunement practices. And so we'll go through what all of that means, but in short, we could call it a body-focused pathway for spiritual awakening and psychological healing. That's how we could conceptualize the realization process. And it's one that is pretty secure against spiritual bypassing because it's not a methodology that leaves us kind of spaced out or anything like that. It's very gentle and grounding, but also transcendent at the same time, which was a mix that I really felt that I needed for my spiritual evolution, because when I started all this, I was just a brain on a stick. And so I really feel like I've benefited from these practices as something that grounded me, and I've seen other people benefit in the same way. Okay, so about this class, Trauma Repair Intensive, we could say it's trauma healing with a spiritual foundation in a confidential group environment over Zoom. And we could say that there's 3 healing factors present in the class. The course structure, which you can read about on my site, basically it's 5 classes. The first half hour of each class is training in specific contemplative techniques, or you could say healing meditation type techniques, healing body-focused meditation techniques that are for attunement to the ground of being as a pervasive field or domain of unconditional love, which we can access through our bodies, through our chakra system, and through our, what in yoga is called the Sushumna, and what Tibetan Buddhism is called the central channel. But you can read more about this on my site. But basically, one of the healing factors is direct facilitation and training in these transformative practices. And that means facilitation with individuals. So each individual or each participant in class gets at least 2 facilitations where we'll go through different types of release techniques for releasing trauma from the body or releasing it from the energy body. And in addition to that, there's also the heart-centered presence of the group itself. So everybody kind of just being present with one another and really holding a space for one another. So that's a second factor. And the third is vicarious healing, which to me, so that's kind of a juxtaposition to vicarious traumatization, right? We can experience another person's difficulties in a way where we feel stressed about that. And if we witness somebody heal, a lot of times we can recognize their same issue in ourselves. And as we witness them release something, we can somehow feel that release partially happening even in our own mind-body energy system. So what does trauma repair mean? This class is a trauma repair intensive. What is trauma and what is trauma repair? Trauma, we're defining as any abrasive stimuli that was too intense or confusing to process when it happened. And so that's a continuum going from, events of severe impact, injury, or abuse, of like physical abuse or sexual abuse, to something that was maybe constant denigration, or something that's more relational, or sometimes called attachment trauma, right? So any of those types of experiences that are kind of an energetic static that's lingering in our mind-body system, That is what we're talking about when we're talking about trauma. So repair happens when mentally generated suffering is healed at the root of the symptom. So we could say that trauma exists because we went through some painful event, and then we said, you know what, this event is too painful to experience, and I've got to just shut down this part of myself that experienced this event. There's something like that that goes on. Not a conscious decision, but we could say it's an unconscious reflex. It's something that's just very difficult. And so we have to organize ourselves in relation to our environment to survive. And sometimes that organization involves a kind of clamping down on our experience so that we can deaden some of the impact of pain or of suffering. Okay. So when we are able to repair something at the root of the symptom, what that means is that we no longer have to override or counteract our triggers when they emerge because they no longer emerge, okay? This, in some types of experiential psychotherapy, is called erasure. And in the realization process, we would say that we're releasing the contraction or the holding pattern in the mind-body system from the core of the body, or from our core. Okay. All right. So how does this healing process work? And you can see on the right, there's an image of this statue of a woman, and her body is infused with light. So there's these, there are these what look like cracks or maybe injuries, but there's light coming from the inside. And if you think about the healing process, the way that I like to think about it is that there is light that we can feel through the internal space of our body. This is the light of consciousness, or the light of the ground of being itself. And when we can feel into that light, it naturally tends to organize our mind-body system such that if you could, imagine the whole body being infused with light or pervaded by light, that's what starts to happen. And so those, the wounds or traumatic holding patterns start to spontaneously unwind as we allow the part of ourself that was wounded to be exposed to this light, the light of unconditional love, or the light of consciousness itself. So how do we heal? If you're thinking, well, yeah, but how the heck do I heal from fill in the blank? We all have something like this, some problem that's really stubborn or really persistent, right? Something that's persistent that we just haven't been able to quite get underneath. That's good. That's exactly what this class was designed for. We identify the pain points that have been resilient to healing, and we heal them. And so on this slide, I have an image of, it's an abstract image of a kind of fabric that looks like it's in a twist. And we could say that when we go through certain difficult experiences in life, our mind-body system, again, has to organize itself in a certain way. And you could think about that as like a twist going into a piece of fabric, right? And so let's pause on that for a second, and let's answer this question. Is it really that simple that we heal what's there in terms of psychogenic pain? Yes, it can be that simple if you understand how healing works. So this piece of fabric that gets a twist in it, right? We can liken our mind-body system to the same type of thing. We get a twist or a constriction, and that could be like an energy block in the body, a sense of contraction, a sense of numbness in a certain area, or a shutdown of sensation. Sometimes it can feel like a tightness. Sometimes it's muscle spasms. Sometimes they can be, for people that are energetically sensitive or who've been through different esoteric practices before, sometimes they have what's called Kundalini syndrome type symptoms. But in any case, a lot of this comes from clamping down on our mind-body system in a way such that we're shutting down our sensations or our emotions in some way using volition that's become unconscious. So you can think about it, we can liken the twist in the fabric for a second, kind of like putting our hand into a fist. And so if our hand was in that fist, balled up in that fist for just for years, it would get to a point where we forgot that we were doing that, or we forgot, how we were doing that and why we were doing that. And so if we can mentally bring our focus into these areas of constriction, what'll start to happen is they'll come alive a little bit. They'll start to move just by bringing our focus into those areas. And we can bring our focus in and the constriction can move. Sometimes it'll move out of the contraction. And when it does that, generally there's kind of a spontaneous opening of the emotional content that's there. Or if it's a little more persistent, or if the constriction is a little more ingrained, what'll happen is we'll bring our focus into the constriction and it'll actually get tighter, right? But then we release our focus and the constriction kind of spontaneously unwinds, kind of like a piece of fabric untwisting a bit. And all we're doing there is feeling into the initial pathway through which we were wounded to begin with, and using that same pathway for release. Within these constrictions, so one insight from somatic psychotherapy is that the body acts as a registry for the unconscious mind. And what that means is if something is in our unconscious, generally speaking, it's stored in the body somewhere. We can feel it as kind of a shutting down in our midsection or a constriction in our chest. And if we focus on those areas in the body, what will start to happen is we can start to feel an emotional dimension to those constrictions, and eventually a mental dimension. Maybe, and by mental dimension, I mean memories of maybe what happened that led us to constrict in that way, or to shut ourselves down, the purpose of going into that constriction, right? And once we can feel that full dimensionality of the constriction or energy blockage in our body, then that, and we can integrate that into conscious awareness. That's 90% of the healing process right there. The other part is just, part of it's just the realization that we don't have to be that way anymore, or, reality really isn't like we were led to believe it was when we had initially, constricted our experience in some sort of defensive armoring or patterning. Okay. So keys to a safe trauma repair experience are, number one, experiencing a depth of our being that is a pervasive domain of clear consciousness and unconditional love. And this is a profoundly safe experience. Okay, so when we're able to access different qualities of what's sometimes called Buddha nature, if we were in a Western religious context, we might say divine ground of being, aspects of this fundamental dimension of consciousness. One of those is love, and we can experience that love as something that kind of wells up in our chest. We can also experience it as a non-dual, or you could say pervasive or transcendent dimension of being that's actually not that hard to access. There are some pretty simple techniques that we can use to access at least some of that dimension as a way to resource ourselves. So with this dimension in the background, we can experience releases that go quite deep, that are quite profound. And again, going back to what I said before, at some point, all of us, at some point or another, had formed belief that part of reality was just too harsh to cope with. And if this part of ourself, or these parts of ourself that feel that, okay, reality was just too harsh to cope with, maybe our teenage self felt that part of reality was just too harsh to cope with. If we can feel into that aspect of ourself that's still kind of stuck in that holding pattern, or in that, in that kind of mental mode, and we can allow that part to be suffused with this love from the ground of being, that is ultimately what allows that part of ourselves to unpack and to feel fully resolved. Okay. How long does healing take? And you'll see I've got this image of this closet that's just overflowing with stuff on the right-hand side. So this is like asking, well, how long will it take to organize my closet? And the answer is, it really depends on the closet. A professional organizer would have trusted practices that would help you get organized, and the process would go faster, certainly, than it would if you were to do it by yourself. At the same time, the duration of healing is always, it always depends on the depth of suffering. So, of course, the effectiveness of the method will accelerate the cleaning of anybody's closet, right? So the more effective the method is, the faster it's going to move along. At the same time, we don't want to be in a rush. We want to be patient with ourselves. In a way, slower is faster, as they say in some, I forget where this came from. It might have been somatic experiencing that I got in this quote, but slower is faster, right? When we're patient and gentle with ourselves, this is what ultimately really catalyzes the healing process, paradoxically. We don't want to be in a rush. So the time is going to go by anyway. This is a quote that I remember from self-help author Brian Tracy. Time's going to go by anyway. What that means is that if it seems like it's really daunting to really engage some sort of healing process, if it seems daunting, you're in good company, because the rest of humanity, everybody has something that is really challenging for them. It'd be really challenging for them to try to heal. And that is also the source of our greatest evolutionary benefit on a spiritual level, I believe. I don't see how it could be any other way. That our greatest pain or suffering is also our greatest opportunity for transformation and spiritual evolution. And so that by the time is going to go by anyway, I mean, what else are we going to do with our life but move or make progress on solving our deepest problems, right? What else are we going to do? So, I mean, if we just sat on our hands, then nothing's going to happen. And if the alternative is that, every day a little bit of progress is made on cleaning that closet, then at some point we'll be in a place where, our closet is pervaded by the light of consciousness itself. So, okay. How do we address resistance in this class? How do we work with resistance? So, because this is a common topic in both meditation and healing from a spiritual point of view. So the exercises we do in this class are very gentle, and we constructively utilize resistance versus trying to overpower it. And the way that we'll do that is if somebody says, well, yeah, I can feel into my heart center or my heart chakra, but I feel like there's a tension there. I feel like I don't want to do that all the way, right? Instead of me saying, well, just see if you can focus a little bit harder, right? Instead of me saying something like that, I might say, oh, that's interesting. Well, what would happen? What does the discomfort feel like when you try to focus in? Is there any emotional tone to that discomfort? Or I might ask something like, if you were to imagine yourself with your heart chakra open, if you were to just imagine that, there it is, the door of love swings open, what happens? And then the answer is sometimes, oh, well, yeah, oh, I would just feel really exposed. And so then we would explore that, because that's really important, right? It's really important that we don't try to blast through resistance or anything like that, because that's just going to cause more trauma. It's really important to understand the mind-body system's own rules for transformation and healing. If somebody says, well, I can't do this exercise because of X, what that means is that they will only feel comfortable being able to do some exercise if that condition is resolved. So maybe we have to look at that condition first before we get to some of the release practices, right? Because sometimes there's a level of safety that we have to feel with ourselves before we can do some of the heavy, some of the deeper release work. There's a sense of safety that we have to have. There's a sense of, common ground that we have to establish, and so on. And all those considerations are really important. So the very gentle techniques that we'll be exploring in class, I categorize 3 of them. One is attunement, the other is release, and the other is inquiry. Attunement means that we're making ourselves available to some transcendent dimension of consciousness and allowing that to organize our whole mind-body system. Release means that we are releasing constrictions or contractions or holding patterns or emotional schemas, however you want to say it, from the core of the mind-body system, And inquiry, if there is resistance, inquiry is into the purpose of a symptom or the purpose of resistance or discomfort with transformation, and whether that is necessary any longer. Okay, so that's, I would say the three pillars would be attunement, release, and inquiry, the three pillars of healing in the class. And this class has a very experiential approach. You could call it an empirical approach, meaning that when the emotional charge of a trauma trigger is erased, how are you going to know that? Well, your mind and body will feel lighter. And often you'll feel that right in class or right as we're doing an exercise. Your mind-body system will feel lighter. You can also test whether you feel triggered in the moment by the same issue. You know, I might ask you a question, okay, well, if you think back to that thing that you said was a problem, you know, when we started this exercise or when we started this class, does it still feel kind of sticky for you? Do you still feel triggered by that? And that's, you know, we could say that that's the verification phase of whether we experienced, you know, a transformation of some sort. And there's also, there's also between classes, you'll notice that you're not as triggered by the issue. And this happens without effort, right? You'll notice differences in your experience even between classes. So that's how you know that a trauma trigger is erased or is in the process of being erased at the root. Okay. So course prerequisites, and right here I've got a magic wand. Okay. You don't need a magic wand to take this class, but one thing that I like to ask people, so of course, one of the prerequisites is that you agree to the confidentiality policy, and you're aware of your psychological history. Maybe you've done some other healing work in the past. It's suggested that you have a specific outcome goal that you're looking to achieve. And so the magic wand here, there's a question I like to ask often, which is, if you had a magic wand, how would you want to make your experience different? What would you do with the magic wand such that your experience could be different after this class or after you receive facilitation for today? And so that's often a way to focus into what the outcome goal for the class is. Another you know, equally helpful question might be something like, what's your biggest stressor right now? Or what's a problem that's been really persistent for you that you've wanted to resolve? What would that be, right? So those are two good questions for focusing in on what we want to resolve in class. Okay. So what does the course include? So in taking the class, you'll receive several different practices for experiencing profound releases and attunements. You'll receive 5 recorded videos of non-confidential content, so the meditation exercises and presentations, and you'll get recordings of your own individual sessions. You'll also get course notes with exercises presented and email support between classes. So you can read the full versions of these testimonials or client experiences on my site, realizationconsulting.com. It feels a little indulgent to read them, but basically, people have had, you know, transformative experiences with this work, and I don't want this to be. Incidentally, there are testimonials about work that people have done with me, but these are really testimonials to the power of a good technique when applied to the mind-body system. Or we could put differently, we could say, these are testimonials of the mind-body system's own natural abilities to heal itself when the conditions are right? When we sort of, when we're using practices that use those innate abilities of the mind-body system to heal. So for instance, it goes back to that notion of that there's a pathway by which we internalize some sort of trauma, right? And this pathway exists in a kind of invisible architecture of the mind-body system. And if we can understand that architecture, it's really not hard to heal. It's actually a quite simple process. And, you know, in this class, we're just utilizing those principles. We're learning those principles, utilizing those principles for transformation, and we're applying them. And that's really it. So if you have questions or you want to register, you can go to realizationconsulting.com. You can scroll down to services and find a link to the trauma repair intensive class. You can email me at michael@realizationconsulting.com. And if you decide that working one-on-one is a better format for you, or if you're not sure if this class is for you, or if you just have more questions, you can email me to schedule a free 30-minute consultation and let me know what your issue is. Okay? Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you soon.